It's August 23rd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with Japan's Fukushima wastewater release. The 3-decade-long process will begin tomorrow, 2 days after the country made the final call on discharge day. The IAEA issued a separate statement to South Korea, promising to provide real-time monitoring data. Ahead of the U.S. Commerce Secretary's visit to China this week, Washington is taking a softer approach to Beijing by removing 27 Chinese firms from its unverified list. And here in South Korea, a nationwide air raid evacuation drill will take place at 2 p.m. this afternoon. For 15 minutes, people and residents must evacuate to nearby shelters, apartment building basements, or subway stations. It's been 12 years since the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And for the next 30 years, Japan will release over 1 million tons of wastewater into the ocean starting tomorrow. Our Peunji leads our coverage this morning.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has said the country will go forward with the release of wastewater on Thursday, August 24th, if they encounter no obstacles. A total of about 1.3 million tons of wastewater will be discharged from the destroyed nuclear power plant in Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean over the next 3 decades. The decision was made after the Japanese government held a cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning to discuss the issue.
As for the specific release date, it is expected to be August 24th, weather and sea conditions permitting.
Announcing the plan, Prime Minister Kishida said he believes there has been support and understanding from a wide range of regions and countries based on scientific evidence from the International Atomic Energy Agency. The IAEA, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, approved the discharge last month, saying that it finds the plans to be consistent with international safety standards. Prime Minister Kishida also asked the operator of the power plant, Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, to prepare for the discharge swiftly. In response, TEPCO said it has begun the preparations needed, starting with the transfer of the first batch of treated water from storage tanks into a facility on Tuesday morning. The company said it expects a total of 31,200 tons to be discharged by next March, and explained that this is about 3% of the total amount. TEPCO plans to use a purification system called the ALPS to remove radioactive materials with the exception of tritium that's difficult to separate from water. It will then mix with seawater to dilute it before releasing into the ocean through an underwater pipe that's about 1 kilometer long. Japan's latest decision comes just days after the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan held a historic summit as Seoul and Tokyo worked to resolve historical disputes and restore ties. Meanwhile, some Japanese media outlets have suggested that the reason Kishida is eyeing an early release within this month is to avoid the fishing season in Fukushima, which begins in September. It's been about 2 years since the Japanese government first announced its decision to discharge the water into the Pacific Ocean as storage space was running out. And it has been around 12 years since the Fukushima nuclear power plant was destroyed by a massive tsunami and earthquake on March 11, 2011. Peunji, Arirang News.
And the South Korean government sees no issues with the wastewater release when it comes to science or technology. But the country remains focused mostly on the safety and health of its people. Choi Min-jang reports.
With Japan set to proceed with the release of Fukushima wastewater as soon as Thursday, the South Korean government has determined that there are no scientific or technical problems with the planned discharge. Speaking at a briefing on Tuesday afternoon, the first deputy chief of the Office for Government Policy Coordination, Park Gu-yeon, stressed that this, however, does not mean that the government accepts or supports the wastewater release.
Our government concluded today that we'll ask Japan to immediately stop the discharge if the actual process goes differently from what was planned, as it would threaten the safety and health of our people.
In order to enhance the transparency and reliability of the disposal, Park said South Korea has consulted with the IAEA and Japan about having Korean experts participate in the on-site inspection operated by the IAEA. The Korean government also asked Japan to immediately stop the release and notify the government if something unusual occurs. Lastly, South Korea has requested the sharing of real-time information for prompter, transparent monitoring. In response, Japan, in coordination with the IAEA, agreed to post relevant data online every hour, with the information provided in Korean as well. To ease concerns, the government announced its future plans aimed at protecting the safety and health of people in Korea.
As we have done so far, our government will focus on the health and safety of the people and respond transparently and promptly, while doing our best to minimize damage to fishers and the fisheries industry.
First, the government plans to significantly expand the scope of monitoring to include the waters near the Pacific Islands and the Northwest Pacific near Japan. Authorities also vowed to expand simulations using actual data obtained after the release to reflect what's really going on. The government has been judging that the impact of the release on domestic waters and marine products will not be significant. This comes as results from various simulations have shown that radioactive substances from the wastewater would flow into Korean waters several years later in a considerably diluted state. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And for a thorough monitoring of the release, the International Atomic Energy Agency will remain stationed at the plant, providing real-time updates to the international community. The IAEA also issued a separate statement to South Korea, promising to hand over the info regarding the release regularly. Our Shin Ha-young has the details.
The International Atomic Energy Agency will review the situation during and after the discharge of Fukushima wastewater. Following the announcement by the Japanese government on Tuesday, the IAEA published a statement on its website saying that its staff on-site will continue to monitor and assess the activities to ensure their ongoing alignment with safety standards, including on the day of the discharge starting and after. The agency has staff stationed in a Fukushima office that was opened last month, where South Korea will also send its experts. The IAEA experts there will directly observe the process of collecting wastewater samples. While regularly visiting related facilities, they will coordinate discussions between the IAEA and Tokyo Electric Power Company if any changes occur. It also plans to publish data for the use of the global community, including real-time monitoring information. An additional update will be provided as soon as the discharge begins. Unlike the United States, which has been supportive of the discharge, China has criticized Japan's latest decision.
China strongly urges Japan to rectify its wrongful decision and withdraw its plan to discharge nuclear-contaminated water into the sea.
A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson added that Beijing will take necessary measures to safeguard food safety and the health of its people. Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee on Tuesday said he strongly opposes the decision, saying the city would immediately activate import controls on Japanese seafood. On the other hand, the European Union last month decided to remove its import restrictions on Japanese food that had been in place since the nuclear accident in 2011. Meanwhile, the environmental organization Greenpeace has criticized Japan's latest decision, arguing that it violates human rights in both Japan and the Pacific region and that it ignores the concerns of people, including fishermen. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The U.S. has urged North Korea to call off its planned launch of a spy satellite, echoing South Korea and Japan's stance by calling the launch unlawful. The State Department spokesperson said Washington is against the launch, saying it violates UN Security Council resolutions that prohibit the regime's use of ballistic missile technology for any purpose, including for a space launch vehicle. Now, launching a satellite requires the same technology as an intercontinental ballistic missile. The remarks come after Pyongyang reportedly notified Japan of its plan to launch a satellite between August 24th and August 31st. So, North Korea has warned that it will shoot for a second launch of what is presumed to be the first spy satellite as early as August 24th. That's tomorrow. For more on the North's latest launch-related moves, we are joined by Mr. Jaakko Zeslut this morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Sure, Jaakko. So the North may go for the second attempt for its first spy satellite as early as tomorrow or as late as next Thursday. Now, the question is, why this specific period?
Now, believe it or not, but I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm just the host of the NK News podcast. But I was, by doing some reading, I was unable to find any physical or technical reasons why it would choose this period over another. I think that there are potentially a couple of factors to be taken into consideration. And the most important one is that the launch in May was a failure, and that the satellite that fell into the sea is now in the hands of the South Korean government. North Korea wants a military reconnaissance satellite in orbit, and once it has sorted out the technical problems that led the first launch to fail, it is ready to launch again to try to get one up there. From North Korea's perspective, since it doesn't yet have a dedicated military reconnaissance satellite, the sooner it succeeds, the better. And that's probably why it's choosing now. Another factor would be weather and meteorological conditions.
Right. The North Korea, they want the military satellite because it is, if it goes successfully, it will be their first ever version of that missile satellite. Now, can we see the move as an apparent protest against South Korea, U.S. joint militaries that have been going on, or the Camp David Trilateral Summit, or is the North trying to commemorate some kind of major events or anniversaries?
Not necessarily. Certainly, North Korea is disturbed about the combined South Korea-U.S. drills called the Ulchi Freedom Shield that started this week, as well as the optics of the three leaders of Japan, South Korea, and the United States becoming closer and talking about joint security issues at Camp David. But we have to look at the satellite launch as separate from that, because this was going to happen anyway, regardless of drills or summits. North Korea, when it is angry and wants to signal a protest, usually launches missiles, and it does so without warning. This is different because North Korea actually did notify Japan of its intentions to launch a satellite into space, and that's probably because North Korea wants to be seen publicly as a responsible and peaceful user of space. In terms of special days in North Korea, coming up this Friday, the 25th, that is Songun Day, or the Day of Songun, which commemorates the 25th of August 1960, the day that the late Kim Jong-il apparently made an inspection of the Seoul Ryugyong-su Guards 105th Tank Division with his father Kim Il-sung and gave a speech about the military needing to come first. And that is what Songun means, military first. So if the launch is actually on Friday, August the 21st, then we will be able to say in hindsight that it is a significant day, a Songun Day launch, but not before then, because launches can always be affected or delayed by things like weather forecasts.
Right, the launch plan has been on the North to-do list since its first failure back in May.
Yes, they did have some engine problems in May. At the time, North Korea's National Aerospace Development Administration, or NADA, reported that there was, quote, abnormal ignition of the second stage engine, and the new engine system reliability and stability failed, and the fuel used was unstable. Now, according to George William Herbert, who's an adjunct professor at the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies and a missile consultant, this rocket used in May was believed to be fitted with a liquid fuel engine. We know that North Korea has tried some solid fuel missile engines recently, and South Korea's National Intelligence Service reported last week to the National Assembly's Intelligence Committee that it had detected heavy activities at a North Korean facility that produces solid fuel missiles, and also at a site that is related to liquid fueled missiles. North Korea has 4 types of intercontinental ballistic missiles, 3 of which use liquid fuels, and the last one that uses solid fuel. So it remains to be seen exactly what type of rocket it will use to get, this time, to get its satellite into orbit. Now, are they ready? Kim Jong-un and his scientists seem to believe that they are ready. Mr. Kim is a harsh taskmaster, and I'm sure his scientists do not want to disappoint him, and that can add pressure and skew incentives. So let's wait and see if they're actually correct this time.
Yeah, I can imagine how heavy that burden is on those scientists. Now, Jaakko, if the second attempt is once again unsuccessful, let's say, do you think the North Korea will go for a third attempt, 4th, 5th, and maybe even the 10th? Who knows? And if they do stop, when will they ever stop?
Yeah, now I cannot claim any special insight into Kim Jong-un's mind, but last year, during a visit to the Satellite Control Center of the National Aerospace Development Administration, Kim Jong-un said It is the strategic and tactical policy of the party to strictly watch and distinguish the hostile military actions against the DPRK committed by the U.S. imperialist aggression army and its followers in and around the Korean Peninsula. So I believe that North Korea has shown the world again and again that it will spare no resources to get the technology that it wants to make itself feel safe. Because the most common type of satellites orbit around the Earth rather than stay in one place, one satellite will not be enough. So North Korea will want more. So building a network of reconnaissance satellites is a goal of North Korea's security strategy. I don't see any reason why North Korea will stop. You mentioned earlier that the United States State Department called on North Korea to stop its plans. South Korea's foreign ministry yesterday released a statement regretting North Korea's plan to launch a satellite and calling on Pyongyang to cancel it. And the Unification Ministry called it an illegal act. Now, I don't think that the South Korean government believes that North Korea will listen to these statements, and I don't expect it will change the launch plans at all. But I think these are things that governments must say in this situation.
Right. Now, it sounds like the whole spy satellite launch plan is a long-term plan that's just not going to last for a couple of months.
That's right. I think it's going to go on for quite a while there.
All right. Jaakko, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have a good day.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in the meantime, Washington has renounced its ban on Americans traveling to North Korea for another year, maintaining a restriction that has been in place since 2017. According to the U.S. State Department on Tuesday, the latest extension comes amid rising tensions over Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, as well as the uncertain status of U.S. serviceman Travis King, who fled to the north last month. Now, the ban will be published in the Federal Register set for release on Wednesday and has been signed by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The ban will remain in place until August 31st, 2024. The U.S. has made clear that it doesn't want the Chinese economy to tumble, calling on Beijing to be more transparent about the state of its economy. Washington also removed some Chinese entities from its export control unverified list. Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
Last week, the Chinese government stopped the publication of a report on soaring youth unemployment amid concerns the statistics would reveal new weaknesses in the country's recovery. China also cracked down on corporate due diligence firms operating in the country, halting the flow of information to overseas businesses. In response, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Tuesday called on Beijing to be more transparent about the state of its economy. Speaking to reporters in Washington, Sullivan said that for global confidence, predictability, and the capacity of the rest of the world to make sound economic decisions, it's important for China to maintain a level of transparency in the publication of its data. His comments also come as U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo is set to travel to China at the end of this month for talks with high-level Chinese officials in what seems to be a move by Washington to stabilize relations with Beijing. Raimondo's trip follows a 4-day visit by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen last month, who held more than 10 hours of meetings with senior officials in Beijing. Meanwhile, in a bid to further normalize bilateral trade with China, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced Tuesday local time that it has removed 27 Chinese entities from its export control unverified list. The Chinese Commerce Ministry welcomed the decision, saying that the move is in line with the common interests of the two sides. The ministry added that solutions that would be beneficial to both countries can be found as long as the two sides follow the principle of frank cooperation and mutual benefit. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
As part of the ongoing Ulchi civil defense exercise, for the first time in 6 years, there'll be a nationwide air raid evacuation drill. At 2 p.m. later this afternoon, an air raid warning siren will sound. Then, for the next 50 minutes, residents must evacuate to a nearby shelter and listen to radio broadcast. Drivers on designated sections must pull over to the right side of the road. Then the guard alarm will be issued at 2:15, and you can resume moving while maintaining your guard. You can return to normal after the guard alarm is lifted at 2:20. You can find designated shelters on the National Disaster and Safety Portal or on the Emergency Ready app. If there are no shelters nearby, head to a building basement.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in northwestern Pakistan, where 8 people, including 6 children, were pulled from a cable car in a dramatic rescue. Now, the 12-hour ordeal on Tuesday near the city of Battagram saw 1 child airlifted by helicopter, while the rest were moved to safety by a zip line. Pakistan's army said that rescue efforts were made dangerous and difficult because of windy conditions. The children had been on their way to school when one of the cable car's cables snapped almost 300 meters above a ravine. The cable car is used to cut travel time through a valley from 2 hours to just 4 minutes. Now in Greece's northeast, firefighters fighting a wildfire have discovered the remains of 18 burnt bodies. According to the local fire brigade on Tuesday, the bodies were found by a shack in a remote village near the port city of Alexandroupolis. They are believed to have been migrants who crossed in from Turkey. The Greek border region is a known crossing point for thousands of migrants looking to enter Europe. The discovery comes as a number of wildfires rage in Europe, including in neighboring Turkey, where 6 villages have been evacuated and water traffic was temporarily suspended on the Dardanelles Strait. It also comes amid scorching heat waves in southern Europe that have triggered several red alerts in Italy and France. Now, after months of political suspense and legal maneuvers, Thailand has elected Srettha Thavisin of the Pure Thai Party as its new prime minister. The real estate mogul was elected in a successful parliamentary vote on Tuesday, supported by a coalition that includes pro-military parties linked to a 2014 coup that installed military-backed rule. An election back in May saw the Progressive Move Forward party win the most votes, but they were blocked from power by conservative senators. Thavisin's election came hours after former PM and fugitive Thaksin Shinawatra returned to the country after 15 years of self-imposed exile. He was immediately arrested and charged with abuse of power and other criminal offences, which he says are politically motivated. Shinawatra is known as the figurehead for the Pheu Thai Party. And finally, a rare spotless giraffe has been born at a private zoo in the U.S. state of Tennessee. It's currently the only one of its kind in the world that we know of. Only one other spotless giraffe born in a Tokyo zoo in 1972 has ever been recorded in history. A giraffe's spots serve as a form of camouflage and aid in thermal regulation. The zoo is now looking to give her a name and has opened an online vote on its Facebook page. People can choose between 4 names: Kepike, Furyali, Shakiri and Jamila. Voting closes on September 4th.
Good morning. Today is Choseol, the second autumn seasonal term. Summer heat should subside from now. Today's rain might help to cool things down a bit for western regions. Right now, Jeju is seeing 30 millimeters an hour of heavy rainfall, and these rain clouds will gradually expand to western regions. The capital area in Gangwon-do province could see more than 150 millimeters of downpours. The rest of the country could see up to 120 20 millimeters into tomorrow. A heavy rain advisory has been issued for some of the northern central regions. That's including here in Seoul and Jeollado provinces. Rain brings heat relief, but eastern regions will have a scorcher under sunny skies with passing rain in the afternoon. The east will see rain mainly tomorrow. Strong winds could blow in Jeju and coastal regions of Jeollado provinces, and afternoon highs will be 1 to 5 degrees lower this afternoon. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time. Until then, goodbye.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
입니다. 방송 스탠바이. 방송 스타트.
loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. K-animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-animation, befriending children all over the world.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's August 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning again.
Good morning, and Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. We're seeing a surge of adenovirus cases here in Korea. Nearly 9 out of 10 of new infections were children aged 6 and under. The KDCA on Tuesday found that the number of people hospitalized has been on the rise. 29 weeks after the first identified case, only 13.7% of people had visited the hospital, and this figure jumped to 28.5% in just 3 weeks. Adenovirus is a respiratory disease with symptoms like a common flu and even pink eye. Moving on, the movie Barbie has solidified its title as box office queen. As of last Tuesday, the movie topped $537 million in box office sales, and it hasn't stopped yet. Since then, it has become the highest-grossing American movie in Warner Bros. Discovery's 100-year history. The film outsold Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, which made $536 million in 2008. And with more young Koreans not able to find jobs or choosing to stay in isolation at home, the number of subscribers to online communities like DC Inside has also seen a surge. According to a survey done by Mobile Index, the number of people on this online community last month jumped twofold in just 3 years. Experts believe there's a correlation between online community subscribers and the number of isolated young people. What's worrying them even more is that these online communities have often encouraged many to commit suicide or fall into depression. And many people have also uploaded threats on such online communities, saying that they would also join the latest back-to-back stabbing sprees here in the country. Experts also pinpointed how it's hard to censor the type of information uploaded on these communities, which form a dangerous community that could push isolated young people to do crazy things. Some criminology experts refer to the recent brass knuckle murder. Remember the 30-year-old identified as Che who killed an innocent random woman with brass knuckles on a hiking trail? Well, police found out that the assailant was an isolated youth who didn't have a job. His daily routine mainly involved going to a PC room and then heading straight back home. And experts believe that it's isolated young people like Che who are heavily invested in online communities like DC Inside who commit random crimes. Now, I'm going to expand the newsfeed here to the studio. What are your thoughts on this, Walter?
To be honest with you, though I'm not an expert, I do know my fair share in criminology. I would say that these online communities are more like maybe a very small part of a big pie, should I say. They may encourage youth crime, but I don't think they're the main reason why, some people will go out and attack random people. I do agree that if you are are, jobless and usually spend most of your time online, that it can lead to like severe depression as well as loneliness as well. But I would argue that the online communities would be a reason why someone would go out and attack somebody else. In order to actually get a better understanding of what happened with the recent incident, I think that needs to be looked into a little bit deeper, rather than what a lot of media outlets are telling you what is the problem.
I see. Then, Chi, what do you think should be done about this new social phenomenon?
Well, this youth isolation, I think, should definitely now be recognized as a serious social issue, but then it should be addressed comprehensively alongside other youth-related issues, because it's definitely intertwined with issues such as unemployment. And I think Japan could provide a very good example to us as well, because they've gone through this in the past. They first identified isolated youths in the early 1990s, and then they realized that they can tackle this problem with support programs and laws. So we've started identifying these isolated youths in early 2000s, but we've neglected the problem for about a decade, and that's when we started to tackle it as a problem. And so we could really learn from Japan's past as well, and also the role of a central control tower, which can really bring efforts from all levels, including households, schools, and society, is very important as well.
That's a very compelling point. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's head into our discussion topic of the day now. Korea is considered a relatively conservative country, mainly because its history and traditions are heavily tied down to Confucian roots. That's why some believe our ancestors would be shocked if they find out what we see on TV now and different streaming platforms. To find out what this is about, take a look at the screen. This show is called Witch Hunt. It's a relationship counseling program starring the hottest celebrities in Korea. Here, hosts and guests openly talk about relationships and sex. This show's called Risk Business Japan. It compares cultural norms about sex in Japan to those in Korea. We're seeing more shows like these two in Korea, especially on streaming platforms. This is quite groundbreaking in a conservative country like Korea, where openly talking about sex has long been taboo. What has led to such a change in atmosphere? We're going to try answering that question, how we've started to see more sex-related variety and talk shows in Korea. First off, did you guys realize that?
I did. I've realized that we're seeing a lot more of these sex-related programs on our television in the country. But these days, the content has become a lot more explicit compared to the past. And like you mentioned earlier, as Korea has a conservative and Confucian culture regarding sexuality, openly discussing the subject has been somewhat shunned in the past. However, in recent years, there have been numerous stories about sex on the airwaves. For instance, a program called Resting Couple, which is about these sexless couples, and they try to solve these sexual problems of couples through this program. And they've also shown some programs which have specific episodes of these individual panelists, and they share their sexual concerns as well as sharing some useful information on the subject as well. And some of these examples include Ounyoung Report, there's the Marriage Hell, I'm sure you've heard of it, and there's also the Teenage Parents, and we also have Witch Hunt, which you've earlier introduced.
So we are seeing a lot of more variety and entertainment programs in Korea related to sex. Did you realize that?
Well, to be honest with you, reality TV shows don't really tickle my fancy, to be honest with you, but I have been noticing a lot more content on, not just TV, but also YouTube and other platforms as well. It's pretty easy to see. It's not difficult to miss because they usually have like a shock-advertising value to it, whether they all have like, I don't know, like a half-naked body or a sex statement or pornographic images in some way that are like blurred out or something. But I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing as long as it's done in the right way. It could be a very good way to teach Korea about sex education, as we know that in Korea, the sex education system is very poor.
And it's only poor because talking about sex openly has long been taboo, and as you both mentioned, it has been shunned. But why the sudden change? Why do you think we're suddenly seeing more broadcasting content openly talking about sex?
Well, apart from the advancement of technology and digital content, as we know, I think times have really changed for all of us. The millennials and Gen Z, they seek to express sexuality in a more positive, lighthearted, and enjoyable way. And since the younger generation is the main target audience for these content, I mean, media content, they have no choice but to reflect their tastes, right? And we can see the shift in perception towards sexuality, for example, through how it's become a lot more openly available to buy adult products as well. In the past, purchasing these products happened behind closed doors, but now I'm sure you've seen one of these shops before on the streets, right? Adult product shops. And I feel like this is a step in the right direction, as young people don't think there's anything shameful or wrong with talking about sex. And if we taboo it and shun it, then I feel like this will only distort people's perception of sexuality more.
So you are for the social atmosphere of openly talking about it and making it more accessible to people.
As long as it's not distorted.
As long as it's not distorted. And in order for that to happen, we need to be more open and honest about it.
Exactly.
Right. Walter, what about you? Why do you think we're seeing this new wave of broadcasting content?
Well, I completely agree with what she says. And also, I think it's a really good thing that we're being a bit more open about it rather than being closed, because it does help our younger generation understand a little bit more, but as you mentioned, as long as it's not distorted or we teach it in the right manner. Now, obviously, social media as well has given people a platform to talk about their sexual identity, their experiences. To be honest with you, I don't like watching that content because I think I don't really care about what they do with their life. But that actually does show that people aren't alone in this sort of situation, and they don't have to feel like they are by themselves. Or example, if you know, when people come out, they come out on social media, it can encourage other people to come out and, be more open with their sexuality. This trend has also been strengthened by OTT platforms and also YouTube as well. There's, in comparison to TV, even though there is censorship, I think there's a lot less censorship than there is on YouTube and OTT platforms. So therefore, it's becoming more prevalent in today's society. And as long as they have certain restrictions, and I know that some of the OTT platforms do have restrictions, I think it's a very good idea to have them on.
So it all comes down to how we perceive sex and how we perceive talking about it and how open we are to this. And we asked our global viewers how open it is to talk about sex in their countries. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. Let's start with Jamu-jisan, which said, it really does depend on the purpose, whether it's educational or just plain exploitation for ratings and viewership. And Vale Perino said, as a high school student in Portugal, me and my classmates must have 12 classes per school year on sex ed. Our teachers find a specialist to talk with us, and I think it's useful because teens don't really talk about this with their parents. James Watson says, back when I was in high school, we had sex ed class. It was a funny way to learn about sex, but also when it was time to seriously have the discussion, it was very informative because parents didn't talk about sex until bad things happened. And thank you to all our viewers who shared their experience and what they've been through or what they've actually think about sex education and the perception of it with us. Now, I would like to ask our panelists back again in the studio, how do you think the main audience, mainly millennials and Gen Z, people in our age, think about this new broadcasting trend?
Well, most millennials and Gen Z, they have a very favorable perspective towards the changing trend, how sex is discussed a lot more openly. And like I said earlier, these younger generation, they, of course, prefer candor and transparency when dealing with these subjects. But at the same time, millennials and Gen Z, they're also very sensitive to the different perceptions and depictions of women's sexuality compared to men. So in a recent episode of Witch Hunt Season 3, a female panelist discussed the sexual experiences of women. However, the parts she was talking about it was bleeped out, and her mouth was actually blurred with a censored mark. And they also shot the expressions of the male panelists who were listening to her story. And so this was very controversial because some people argued that this was a very discriminatory way of editing a program, excuse me.
A program, and also the fact that they didn't edit it out or cut it out completely, but they chose to air it, yet censor it, this all comes down to how we should be talking about sex on air. Some people might say that it's a right step in the right direction, given that we're being open about it, which I do agree. But then if we're thinking about educational purposes and distortion, if we talk about sex too explicitly like that and just for the sake of entertainment, there are some unseen consequences that could be overlooked. Now, what are your thoughts on that, Walter?
Yeah, and especially for the people who also watch it, especially the younger generation are becoming more and more curious. And I know we hear that a lot of sex-related topics are even exposed to children as young as like early elementary. And so therefore, since they don't really understand the whole concept of it, they need to understand from the get-go that it needs to be done in a more educational way rather than entertainment way. So, you know, there are obviously people who are very much against the way sex is being exposed to the younger viewers out there. Glamorizing it is not the way that we should be doing it. We should be talking about it in how we can do it in a safe manner or an educational manner. Now, sex has, in a way, sort of been a big discussion here in Korean society, but it hasn't been really taught very well in Korea. It's more, don't talk about sex rather than actually bring it to the table sort of thing. And I know that it's a very awkward thing when parents talk about it with their children, but it is something that you need to do and need to talk about in order to make sure, you know, it's done safely.
Right, and especially since we're seeing a lot of entertainment content related to sex come about, why not then push for better sex education so that everyone knows what it's about in order for them to understand and take these content better, I guess. And we're going to include a TV producer from the States in our talks to find out more about this new rising genre in the Korean market. Let's include a TV producer from the States in our talks. It's Matt Graham. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, how are you?
Great to see you again. Now, we're going to go around and ask you a question each. I'll start with the first one. Which country has the most sex-related variety shows or talk shows, and what country was the first to kick off this type of trend?
So I think the trend was really first kicked off. I think it could be credited to the States. I think it actually goes back to like the 80s. Talk radio. There was a really famous guy, he's still around today, Howard Stern. And he in the 80s really started pushing and getting back to what you were all talking before, started speaking to these taboo topics that are actually pretty relatable everyday experiences that no one felt comfortable talking about at the time. One episode he did in the 80s was about his wife's miscarriage, and it ended up being like the highest rated episode that he had done at the time. People loved it because no one spoke about it. It was one of those like hidden topics that people just kind of, for all intents and purposes, ignored in public. And he really shifted the conversation. In the 90s, you started having these shows like Jerry Springer, Maury kind of pop up with that more tabloidy, sensationalist paternity test kind of infidelity conflict segments. And obviously those were rating bonanzas, and so they kept on making them. And starting in the 2000s, you had the dawn of the dating show. Like Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire, I think was the first one. Very controversial, but you know, the controversy again fueled ratings, and that led into The Bachelor, all sorts of them. And now Netflix, I saw a lot of Netflix shows on the reel. They're really dominating this scene. And to the other question you had, it's interesting on Netflix because they'll have the same show but geared towards different countries. They have one show, Too Hot to Handle. I think they have a U.S. version, a Brazilian version, a German version. And so you can see the same show and how the sexuality is either more liberal, more conservative, just country to country. And I've noticed that in terms of the openness and liberalism of sexuality is probably most prominent in South America, Central America. Some European markets, I would say, are the most open. But yeah, I think that's kind of where it is at today.
I see. So, Matt, what changed in the socioeconomic atmosphere for this type of broadcast genre to be a hit?
I think twofold. One is a lot of it is, again, relatable content that wasn't really being discussed. Another is the inherent drama and kind of controversy that exists within this genre. These dating shows, I mean, at their core, whether authentic or not, it's about finding love, and so those stories are messy and inherently crazy things are going to happen. People act differently on TV. They also act differently when they're competing for love, and so it's really hard to look for the audience to look away in a lot of these shows. The other is, these things are relatively cheap to produce in terms of television. So I do think for production companies, especially now with a lot of the strikes going on in the world, it's easy to make these things, it's cheap to produce, and people love them. People eat it up.
Yeah.
Just wondering, Matt, if you've had a chance to actually see any of the Korean content that we have out there, and how do you evaluate the Korean content in this genre? And do you think there's any room for improvement for us?
Yeah. I think, in general, I am a huge fan of what Korea is doing in the content production space in general. For decades, Korea has been punching way above its weight in like the feature film production arena. And in the last few years, they've also just really, I think, been dominating the reality television scene in general. It's really impressive how much and what an impact a country of Korea's size is making on the global environment in terms of entertainment, I would say. So I think it's doing a lot of great stuff. I didn't know all the shows that were in that opening reel, so I'm excited to go back and kind of check out some of the stuff that was there. In terms of room for improvement, I think Howard spoke about it earlier. I think something that I haven't noticed in watching Korean television is any sort of representation of, or at least very minimal representation of LGBTQ plus or queer communities. And so I know that, there are a lot of stories out there, a lot of experiences that many people, I'm sure, would benefit from relating to and listening, knowing they're not alone. And so having some more representation in those areas, I think, could be beneficial. But on the whole, I think Korea is doing a great job.
Yeah, more representation, especially on these minority communities that has long been, concealed here in Korea. But thank you so much, Matt. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. As Matt mentioned, I think there is still a lot of room for improvement when it comes to content related to sex here in Korea. As we mentioned here in the studio, we still need a premise, and that being better sex education. But it's so hard to do that, especially when you're trying to produce an entertainment show, because you need to think about the entertainment part. But aside from that, what type of content or new genre would you guys like to see?
Well, it's all about entertainment, really. So for me, I'm a person who loves documentaries, and I even consider, in some cases, though I don't watch them, the reality TV shows documentaries, because it's supposed to be based on real life events. But it doesn't always have to be about sex, in my opinion. It could be about the wacky world of people, right? I'm a big fan of Tiger King, and if you've seen that, I mean, we know how outlandish some people are out there, and I know that we have some of those characters in South Korea. So I do want to see documentaries related to that sort of area, but obviously in a way, it's a very tasteful way, not to we're demeaning the person or making fun of them, but yeah, more content like this is something that will get me hooked, I think.
What about you, Jihi?
Well, apart from sex programs, first of all, I want them to be a little more educational plus entertainment. But then at the same time, I also want to see more programs that cater to different age groups, not just specific groups. And I believe with more of these programs, we can really help bridge the gap between generations. generations and the problems that arise because of not understanding the differences.
So I guess Matt, you and Walter all agree we need more representation and diversity in our content. Then that'd be I guess we'll nail it then. All right, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.